You are all 30 points down the polls. I'm looking at some of you will not get reelected if there was an election this fall. This is the most cynical play to just throw the abortion scare tactic. Would you like to respond to that observation?
Absolutely.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Since the Liberals have brought in prescription birth control in their fake pharmacare bill, they've used that as a match to gaslight all of Canada that the Conservatives are the far-right boogeymen that are coming to take away all of your rights and institute a ban on abortion in Canada. The problem that they're running into is that their longtime talking point that was once an ace in the hole is now equivalent to the two of clubs in a losing hand. Nobody's buying it. And for the first time, reporters are not accepting their fake outrage answers.
Let's take a look.
Hello, as the chairperson of the Liberal Women's Caucus, I'm here representing the Women's Caucus and members of the Liberal Party, and we've sent a letter to the Leader of the Opposition, asking him to be very clear with Canadians, and in particular with Canadian women, on what he would do to defend a woman's right to choose. We've seen that his caucus, there are many anti-choice caucus members. We've seen some of their actions recently, including MP Kathy Wagenthal, who at the pro-life rally held here last week said that women who have abortions end up needing redemption, forgiveness, and needing God. We as women want to know whether the Leader of the Opposition will ensure that his caucus does not put forward legislation that in any way impinges on women's rights and freedoms, in particular bodily autonomy.
So here's a great way about how our legislative process works. Members who are not part of the cabinet and not the prime minister or the parliamentary secretaries can put forward what's called a private member's bill, and they can make it about whatever they want. The thing about private members' bills, though, is they rarely leave the House, and many of them die after first or second reading. Some don't even ever leave the order of precedence, meaning that they are read into the record at first reading, and then they just die off. That's it.
Right. So you can have a party member. Let's say there's a member of the NDP that doesn't believe in climate change. So they could put forth a private member's bill to overturn the carbon tax. They have that right. Now, what would probably happen is the party wouldn't support that, and it may not even get into the House. But if, let's play this out as Fox kind of outlined. So yes, there's a couple of Conservative MPs that are, really pro-life. So they would support a ban on abortion. So you may actually see, when the Conservatives are in power, one of them put forth a private member's bill to ban abortion. However, that's not going to go anywhere. Why? Because the Conservative policy declaration on abortion is they are not going to support any legislation to regulate that. So their own party would actually vote against it. That's what would happen. So this lady and this press conference, it's all for show because they know damn well what the Conservatives' position is on this. Michelle Ferreri dramatically illustrated it in the House when she was firing back at Mark Gerritsen, and she even referenced this. So again, for everybody to see, Policy Declaration 86, abortion legislation. A Conservative government will not support any legislation to regulate abortion.
But you may be saying to yourself, Fox, I saw something in the Conservative Policy Declaration that said that Conservative members can vote according to their conscience on matters of abortion. Let's take a look at that.
So that would be Policy Declaration 10, free votes. The Conservative Party believes in restoring democratic accountability into the House of Commons by allowing free votes. All votes should be free except for the budget, main estimates, and core government initiatives. This is different than the Liberals, by the way. On issues of moral conscience, such as abortion, the definition of marriage, and euthanasia, the Conservative Party acknowledges the diversity of deeply held personal convictions among individual party members and the right of members of Parliament to adopt positions in consultation with their constituents and to vote freely. So this is a really admirable declaration.
And you may be asking yourself, does Declaration number 10, does that not compete or nullify number 86 regarding abortion? And my answer to that is no, it doesn't, because number 86, abortion, the government will not support any legislation. So again, this goes back to how our legislation is formed, in that any member can put forward a private member's bill, or any member can vote for or against an abortion bill, but the conservative government will not allow that bill to pass into law.
Right. But again, it's a admirable policy declaration because it takes into account that there is a diversity of views in the party, and there's a diversity of views within Canada. And if you're elected as part of a constituency, your constituents are going to expect you to represent them in all things. So in some cases, there's going to be some MPs that don't necessarily agree with what their constituents, en masse think, but that doesn't matter. They have to represent their constituents if they're going to be a good MP.
And if you're concerned about what your MP or what your nominee believes about particular issues that you are passionate about, ask to sit down and have a word with them. Talk to them about their beliefs versus your beliefs as a constituent, and how they are expected to vote when they go to represent you in the House of Commons.
So we've kind of dismantled the Liberals' whole talking point here. We're going to send a letter to Pierre Poilievre and we want him to clarify. It's clear. It's as clear as can
clear. It's clear in the policy declaration, and I've just cleared it up for you even further.
So this is just a show, and it's to try and scare people into not voting for the Conservatives. Notice everything that the Liberals have done to try to get people to vote for the Liberals, to endear them to them, isn't working. So all they have left is scare tactics. So let's see how that plays out.
Part is not clear. His office has said that they're not going to use the notwithstanding clause on abortion to regulate abortion. He said he's not going to legislate it, introduce it, pass it. So what part's not clear?
That's his government. There are ways that you can have private members' bill that are introduced as well, and the risk is still there. He voted against Morgentaler back in 2008 as person. I mean, he is, in every sense, that caucus and that leader has made women wonder about the risk that they're going to be taking with this leader. And I want him to come out and unequivocally say that they do everything to defend a woman's right to choose, that they will not allow their members to come forward with private members' bills and put forward bills that suggest that a fetus is a person, which is a backdoor way of, again, addressing this issue.
Okay, so what she's talking about at the end, putting forward bills that suggest that a fetus is a person, what they were talking about there is Bill C-311. Now, that was a bill that was sponsored by Kathy Wagenthal, and we've covered it, and we've mentioned it before. And what that legislation does, or intended to do, because it was voted down, was to ask, or not ask, but require the courts to consider whether or not a woman is pregnant when she has a violent crime committed against her. So let's say a woman was attacked and something happened to the unborn child. Or let's say something didn't happen to the unborn child, but the unborn child was put at great risk as a result of the crime. The judge could then consider the fact that there was an unborn child to increase the sentence for that particular individual. That's it.
And we've done a video on this, and we'll make sure that we put a link to it at the end of this video in case you want to go and watch it. But basically, what had happened and how this private member's bill came about is that a man had lost his spouse as well as his unborn daughter in a horrible, violent attack, and was absolutely devastated when the perpetrator only received one sentence and was only charged with one murder as opposed to two. The baby could have been born prematurely at that point and still been okay, and then she would have been her own person. But because she was murdered for all intents and purposes while she was still in the womb of her mother, who was also murdered by this perpetrator, it was only one count of murder.
And for the record, this gentleman is pro-choice. So, you know, he is in full support of this bill, but in the pursuit to demonize the Conservatives, the Liberals and the NDP were labeling this as a backdoor way to legislate abortion. It's actually disgusting, the way that they were playing politics against it. It has nothing to do in any way with abortion. But what they will argue is, well, that's a slippery slope because, you know, they're trying to define, you know, a unborn baby as a person, and that it could be, you know, treated that way by the courts, and that's just a slippery slope to legal. Like, stop. It has nothing to do with it, and you're actually trampling on women's rights in your pursuit of upholding them. It's ridiculous.
Is it he was here. The Harper government had 10 years. I know you weren't here. Many of us were. 10 years in power. They had 4 years as a majority, didn't move one bit. And they had private members who wanted to do things. Guys, you are all 30 points down the polls. I'm looking at some of you will not get reelected if there was an election this fall. This is the most cynical play to just throw the abortion scare tactic. Would you like to respond to that observation?
Absolutely. It's
Please.
not a scare tactic. We've seen what's happened in the States.
Wow.
That was savage. I don't know who the reporter is, but he deserves a high five.
That was amazing.
Incredible.
That was phenomenal. Calling a spade a spade. I know he said two of clubs in the intro, but that's definitely a spade. And they're freaking out now because they're like, "Well, somebody's calling us out on our crap.
We got caught.
What do we do now? I know. Let's freak out and act like a victim. That seems to help."
Do people really think Roe versus Wade would have been overturned? Do we think what was happening there was going to happen? I've been in the women's movement for over 50 years. It is not a scare tactic. Things are going backwards, not only in Canada, but around the world. And these are real risks for Canadians. We need to know very clearly that that party, policies put forth at the convention, individual members are not going to introduce things because we do not want to go the same way as the United States. So it is not a scare tactic. It is a very strong concern. And I may not have been here then, but I was other places working on women's rights, okay? So do not use that as a reason why it's not a scare tactic.
Wow, she had nothing at the end.
She was rattled, man. And you know what? Let's talk about which party is bringing U.S.-style politics up to Canada. I don't think it's the Conservatives. I think it's the Liberals every single chance they get comparing Canada to what's happening in the U.S. They're two incredibly different countries that are structured in two completely different ways. From what I understand about Roe versus Wade and talking to one of my American friends, is that the United States, each state can kind of choose its own laws. That's why you have some very red states like Texas that have very right-leaning laws and other states like California that don't. And what Roe versus Wade did is it made all of the states have to have abortion legal. Now, taking that away left it up to each individual state to choose how they wanted to criminalize or decriminalize abortion.
Right. So it didn't outlaw abortion in the states. All it did is put that power back into the states' hands. Now, you can argue whether that's right or wrong, but you know what? It's not up to us. It's not our country. So you can have opinion on it, but it doesn't really matter. It's not our country. And
it doesn't affect Canada because, again, Canada and the U.S. are structured in two very, very different ways.
And the funny thing is she said at the end, you're right, I wasn't here, but I was other places. Well, that's great. Nobody cares. You weren't in Canada, or you weren't in the government, and you weren't here when Stephen Harper had the majority for 4 years. You know what didn't happen?
They didn't outlaw abortion. If the Conservatives wanted to, they would have done it then.
Right. And there's no reason for them to.
No, because they would instantly lose, what did we say? It was like 97% of the voter base?
97%.
That's a lot of people. And in politics, it doesn't really matter what you believe. Your number one goal is to retain as many voters as possible.
Right.
So if you're like outlawing abortion when the vast majority of your electorate wants abortion to be legal, you are going to piss off the vast majority of your voters.
But isn't it amazing how you see the left completely short circuit when they're called out on their crap.
Last question.
Let's just put it back the other way. The government hasn't also legislated to protect abortions either, right? So why doesn't your government introduce legislation to make it harder for that to get rolled back if there is a conservative government?
Oops.
Great question.
And this is always the question that comes to the Liberals, right? If they really wanted this, if they really wanted to protect, what are you doing to protect women's right to choose? Why don't you put in legislation that would prevent future governments from doing that? But the Liberals haven't.
But the way it is, I mean, in the research I've done previously, abortion was completely illegal until I believe it was 1969, and birth control was illegal up until that point as well. In 1969, they decriminalized abortion and they decriminalized birth control all in the same bill. And abortion had to be performed by a specialist in a hospital, and you also needed to appear before a medical board who would pretty much vote on whether or not you could receive an abortion. In 1988, the Supreme Court struck that down as unconstitutional, saying that it affected a woman's right to life and liberty of her person. So outlawing abortion was essentially made unconstitutional, and therefore it was allowed. Now you will see various rules province to province. For example, in New Brunswick, it is only paid for by their provincial healthcare if it is performed in a hospital setting. But this is like a surgical abortion that we're talking about. Women can also seek special types of medication that will allow an abortion to happen without having to go to a hospital, without having to have a medical procedure. They just take the medication, and that causes the termination of the pregnancy.
So in short, there's many different ways that you can do it in Canada. There's no plans to overturn it. And these Liberals, I'm interested to hear the answer. Why haven't you put in legislation that would prevent future governments from doing this?
You do not want to legislate woman's body.
What? What? You do not want to legislate a woman's body?
How does that make any sense?
What?
I mean, we have things in our criminal code right now that if, you know, a stranger was to do to a woman, or anybody was to do to a woman for that matter, you know, it's illegal. You're legislating how she's being permitted to be touched, you know, her physical interactions with people. And again, it's a protection mechanism. It's to protect that woman. So you are legislating her body.
This is ridiculous. So this is basically just a deflection tactic as to why they haven't actually put this in there. So you just had this other lady saying, well, you know, what is the Conservatives going to do to protect a woman's right to choose? Well, to protect a woman's right to choose, you could legislate that that's protected. And then you have this idiot coming in here and saying, well, you don't legislate a woman's body. This is where the left completely contradicts itself. The more you let them talk, the more they actually prove themselves to be complete hypocrites.
Yeah, they start to eat themselves because, again, they're showing that it's not about actually protecting women. It's about sticking it to the Conservatives because they have the opportunity right now. Essentially, they have a majority with the NDP. So if they wanted to legislate something to protect abortion, they could very easily do that. But they're not doing it. Why?
You do not legislate woman's body. That is not, you make sure that you have access to abortion. You don't want to legislate anybody's body, particularly a woman's.
Even if that is to protect the right to choose, like you're calling?
No, you don't want to legislate your ovaries, your uterus. No, that is not the way that you protect women's rights.
So, in short, this lady has no defense because the reporter came back to say, even if it's to protect them, no, you don't want to legislate the... Well, there technically is legislation.
Right, because you can't assault a woman. I mean, that's legislating her body. You're saying what other people can or cannot do to it.
Yeah, this is the most ridiculous... Okay, so if that's the case, then anyone can do anything to any woman. We're not legislating their bodies.
Right, this makes no sense.
It is absolutely stupid. And this is what happens when the Liberals have nothing else to come at the Conservatives with. They resort to just boogeyman tactics, and when now they're being called out on the reporters, but they're not used to this, by the way. They're not used to this because the ace in the hole always worked before.
Yeah, and most of the people standing up there are backbenchers. They're not cabinet ministers. They're not secretaries. They're the
silent majority of MPs in the Liberal government is what they are. So they just sit back and be good little MPs and do what the party tells them to. But here's the thing. Canadians are going to be telling them to take a walk in the next election because there's not very many of these that are going to be left.